Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at how to make a basic shatter script inside of ExtendScript. Now as you can tell, we are back to making tutorials, and that means a tutorial every Monday and a quick tip tutorial every Thursday. So I thought I would just have a little video introduction to let you know that things are back to normal and we're going to be back to creating some awesome scripts every week. So let's get started and take a look at how this script is going to work. Essentially, the script is going to take any image we give it and split it into squares of the width and height we give it. And the way it works is we just need to load up a composition, select a layer, and choose the width and height and press shatter. Then it's going to go through and shatter each of the pieces and move the anchor point, and this will just allow us to sort of cut out and do lots of things with our image. And of course, you can go in and change the width and height to other values. This may cause some issues as it's just a basic shatter script right now. In this case, it's all good, but sometimes you'll have some extra black space which you'll have to fix in post. So let's go ahead and get started and create the script, which is actually surprisingly less than 100 lines of code. So to get started, we'll open up a new JavaScript file and begin coding our UI. We'll use this UI over here as a reference, so when we code this, we can just look back and see exactly what we need. So we'll start off by making a new window called main window, and the first parameter of window is our palette. It's going to be a palette type of window, and then the name of our script will be basic shatter script. And then the size and position is going to be undefined. Then for that main window, we're going to grab the orientation and set it to column so that everything goes from top to bottom. And now we'll make the first group so we can have some text. So we'll just make a thing called text group, and we'll set that equal to our main window, and we're going to add a group. Undefined size, and we'll just call it text group. The name doesn't really matter. It won't display unless it's a panel. And then for our text group, even though we only have one element, we'll just say the orientation from left to right, which is row. Then we'll go ahead and make a static text variable. We'll just call it instructions. And we'll set this equal to our text group. We want it to be inside the text group. And we're going to add some static text. The undefined size. And we're just going to say the same thing as our actual script here, just our instructions. Select the layer to shatter. And now we can move on to the next group, which has our width, our text box here, our height, and then the other box. So we'll make just a group called group 1. And again, this is inside our main window, and undefined size, and we'll call it group 1. And because we want everything to go from left to right, not top to bottom, we'll set the orientation. So grab group1.orientation is equal to row. Then we're going to need to create a static text element, an edit text element, so we can go in and change the value, and then another one for height. So we'll just create, we'll say width text, width edit text, which would be the first two, and then we'll have the height text, and then the height edit text. And for the width text, we're just going to set this equal to our first group, group 1, and we're going to add static text. And the static text is just going to say width. And then I can go ahead and copy and paste that for the height and change the text there. And then for the edit text, it's pretty much going to be the same thing. We'll grab group 1, and this time we'll add an edit text, undefined size, and we'll set the default to be like 500. But I want it to be a little bit larger in case if they want to say maybe 1,000 or 10,000. So what I can do is grab our width edit text, and instead of changing, say, the size, what we can do is say characters. And this will tell how many characters should be able to fit inside of the window. So if I set it to 4, which it's currently set to, then 4 windows will basically fit inside. So set it to 4. And now we can set up the height edit text, which will be equal to group 1, adding an edit text box, undefined size, and also we'll set this one to be 500. And then same thing, we can set up the characters instead of the actual size. So I'll say the characters of it. And then lastly, we just need to have our group for the button here. So we'll just say a new group called group 2 is equal to our main window. And we'll add a group and call it group 2. And again, good practice to set up the orientation so you never forget. We'll set it to row. And we'll make a last variable called shatter button. and that's pretty self-explanatory. We're going to add this to group 2 here as a button, undefined size, and just has text that says shatter. Alright, so lastly, to view what we have here, we just need to grab our main window, center it, and then we'll grab the main window again and show it. Go ahead and run this in After Effects, and pretty much exactly the same, a couple of punctuation differences, but now we have the UI all done. Now we can move on to writing the code, which is basically a couple of for loops that go through and do some math to create vertices. So the idea behind how it's sort of going to work is that we have the starting point here at 0, 0. If we look up on our info panel here, we start at 0, 0, and then we sort of cut each of these squares out and do the math. And then the next one begins here and does the same thing, and it just keeps going. And then once we reach the end of the row, basically just start over on the next line. So the way we're going to do this is basically start at the origin point 0, and each time we go through and duplicate a new layer, we're going to adjust the X and Y values appropriately. If that doesn't make sense, it will in just a few minutes. So the way we're going to initiate the action is by clicking on the shatter button. So we'll grab our shatter button and say onClick is equal to a function. Before we actually do the shattering, we need to make sure two things. One, that they have a composition selected, and two, that they have at least one layer selected. In the case of this shatter script, we're going to just do one layer, but you can do it for more if you want. So to do this, we're going to first say if. We're actually going to have 3 if statements before we can pass through. The first one, we're going to check app.project.activeItem. If this is equal to null, then nothing is really selected at all. And if this is the case, we can't run. So we're going to tell the user, please select a composition and return false so that it doesn't continue to execute any more code. And then the next step is, what if they have something selected, but it's this, like they have the piece of footage selected, it's not a composition. So we're going to say if app.project.activeItem, the selected item, is an instance of a comp item, but we want to check if it's not. So we already checked, is something selected? Well, if something is selected, make sure it's a comp item. So if it's not a composition item, then we want to say as well, please select a comp, and also return false. So lastly, now that we have a couple of things checking if a comp is selected, if it's made it past this bit of code, we know there's a comp selected. So I'll go ahead and create my variable for comp or composition and set it equal to app.project and the active item. And now we can check one thing inside of here. We need to check how many layers are selected. So I'll grab my comp and I'll grab the method selected layers, and we're gonna say if it's not equal to 0 or not equal to 1, then the user needs to select exactly one layer, because in our script we're just going to have it be a 1-layer shatter. So in this case, I'm just going to alert, please select exactly 1 layer. We also want to grab the selected layer's length, because the selected layers is going to give us an array of layers, so we want to actually check the length, make sure the length is 1. So if it's gotten past all of this, we know that we can now successfully basically shatter. We have all the data we need and everything is going to work okay. So to do this, first I'm just going to create a variable for the 1 layer we're going to shatter, and this is going to be our comp, our selected layers, and the 0 with 1, or the first layer. Then, so that we can easily undo things after we've executed them, I'm going to create an undo group. So app.begin undo group, and inside of here we need to put in the name if we want. So we're just going to call this the shatter process. So that way when you go up to edit, it will say undo shatter process. And then to enclose this, we need to say app.end undo group. And this will be everything in between these 2 lines of code will be undone when we press the undo button. So now we can just link to a function we're about to create called shatter, just the main shatter function sort of. There's a couple of variables and information we want to take into it. The first one is our composition. After that, we want our layer, and we'll also grab, we need to get the width and the height. We can read it from the UI at any time, but it's easiest to start localizing the variables into their specific niches here. So we want to grab the width and the height. To do this, we're going to grab our with edit text, which contains our text here, and we're going to grab the text. The text within it is 500. But if I tell the script just the text, it's going to think it's a bunch of letters, not 500. So what we need to do is parse it into an integer by saying parse int, and inside we'll have our text. Otherwise, it would be considered a string, sort of like this right here between quotes. We can also do the same for our height. So I'll parse int, I'll grab our height edit text and its text. So now down below here outside of our onClick, we'll create our function called shatter. And now we need to set up our variable names inside of here. So we'll just say again comp, our layer, and our width, and our height. All right, now that's all that's left to do is our main function here that has our loop and a bunch of variables to calculate things. So first let's set up those variables, which you'll see how they sort of fit into the piece in a bit. The first one we want to create is a mask shape. So I'll just call it mask shape. And this is going to be containing the 4 points of each of our squares here. It's basically a custom JavaScript object that contains vertices and as well as tangents if you have curved lines. So we'll set this variable equal to a new shape, and say we grabbed our mask shape.vertices. We could say like 1, 0, and then we'd be setting the vertices. So in a bit, we're going to be setting up some variables that change throughout, and we keep setting the mask shape each time we go through. Then we're going to create a variable called maxx and maxy. What these are is the number of times we want to go through here. So in this case, my composition is 1980 pixels long. So how do I know how many squares need to go for each row here? Well, we basically take our width and our comp width and do some math to calculate that. So to get this, we're just going to grab our comp width and divide it by the width of our shape. So this will basically take 1920 divided by 500, which in this case gives you 3.84. So there should be about 4 blocks that go from there to there. But as you can see, we got a decimal here. What we want to do is basically round up this value. So I'm going to say math.round, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the x. I'm going to say math.round. We're going to grab the comp height and divide it by the height. This will tell us how many columns we're going to need. So in this case, we have 4 columns because the height is 1080 and we have 300 pixels in height. So we have 3.6, which rounded is going to give us 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are basically just telling us how many are going to be placed in each row and column. After that, we're going to set up just a couple of empty variables, which will help us define things a bit later. So we'll have new layer, new mask, and my property. These are all going to be used to apply the masks and actually get the square cutouts here. All right, we have a couple more variables, and then we'll dive straight into the for loop code. So we'll want to have a variable called x, which is going to be representative of the x position of our current vertice. So we're going to start at the origin point as we discussed, which is going to be 0. And then we'll do the same thing for y. And then we're also going to want to counter, set that equal to 0, because we're going to use this counter to name this mask 1, 2, 3, etc. And that way we can just have a better naming scheme and not have everything super unorganized. And then the last variable is going to be the center. So that way once we cut things out, we can grab the anchor point and move it over to the center. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the loops now. We're going to start with 2 for loops. All right, so let's just make 2 for loops, one inside of the other. The first one is going to be representative of our columns, and the second is going to be representative of our rows. So to start, we'll start with var e is equal to 0. We'll say e is less than or equal to our max y. So this is going to be go until we've reached as many, this basically means go until we've reached the calculated bottom here, which again is 4 in this case. And then of course increment e by 1. And then the other one, we'll do the same thing with I, and instead we'll use the max. So I is less than, in this case we'll just use less than, our max x I++. So this will essentially start at our first point here, go all the way across, and it's going to go through the amount we need, but we need to do a few specific things in between to tell it when to move on to the next row or column. So the first thing we want to do is increment our counter, because when we get in here, it's set to 0, and we want to start with mask 1. So ideally, we want counter to start at 1 as well. Then we're going to set up our variable called new layer up here, and this is going to be equal to the layer we brought in from here, and we're just going to duplicate it. We're going to duplicate the exact same layer, cut it out, and move it up. So after that, we're going to grab our new layer and use a method called move to beginning, which is going to move it to the top of the layer stack, which will be required because it's going to do this and then basically duplicate, and it needs to make sure that it's on top. So after we've duplicated it and moved it to the beginning, let's also make sure that we turn off the audio, because if they have audio on their main file, then it's going to start stacking and being super loud. So I'll grab my new layer and say audio enabled equals false. So no audio is enabled. And then also we're going to set the name, which you can see we have right here, just mask 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So I'll grab my new layer.name and I'll set this equal to mask. And then from here, we'll just add our counter to that. And I'll also convert that to a string just to make sure it doesn't try and add any unsimilar values. So now we've duplicated our layer, moved it, named it, and turned off the audio. Now let's create a mask on our layer. So I'll grab my variable new mask here and set it equal to our new layer. And we want to add a property and just the mask property. So we're going to add a mask. Then we're going to set the variable my property, which is the property inside of the mask we need, basically for the shape of it. And we're going to set that equal to our new mask and the mask path. And the mask path is kind of like our shape up here, which is going to contain the vertices and the tangent lines. So now we can use our mask shape. And what we want to do is grab the vertices, which again are just going to be the vertices inside of it. And we're going to set this equal to something. Well, we want this to be a square, so we need 4 sets of vertices. So within our vertices here, we need 1, 2, 3, 4 sets. Okay. Ideally, what we're going to do is start at the top left, go to the bottom left, go to the bottom right, and then to the top right. And so we can kind of visualize it in our head how this is going to be. First, what is the first vertex of this point here? That would just be 0, 0. Up here it's 0, 0, which is really just x, y. So our first vertice is x, y. Then we said bottom left is next. How do we calculate this point? Well, this is basically, let's see, x is 0 still, so we can say x, but what is the y? The y is further down along here, which it looks like it's about 300. Well, our height was 300 at the time, so that means we just need to add the height. So we'll say y plus height. Next, on to the bottom right point here. This is going to be a combination of both additions. So we have the width goes over 300 and the height goes 300. So for this, we'll just say width and height. And let's not forget to add x and y to that as well. So it's not just starting at 300 pixels. And then the last point in the top right here is moving over 300 pixels and moving down 0 pixels. So we'll say x plus width, because we're moving over width. And then we're not moving down at all, so y will stay the same. All right, so this will work the first time, but if we apply these same vertices to every mask is going to be exactly like this. It's not going to move out across the composition. So in a minute, we will adjust the values, but first we need to apply them. So I'm going to grab my mask shape, and I'm going to make sure that it's closed, and that's true. What this means is that it's going to be a closed shape. If you've ever made a mask and it's just like this is an open mask, and once we hit this, it's now closed. So we just want to make sure it's closed so we don't have an open square. And then to apply this, we just need to grab my property, which again is equal to our mask and our mask path, and we're going to set the value equal to our mask shape. So if I was just to go ahead and run this now, let's try it out here. Open a new composition, select our layer, and we'll shatter it. Looks like the error right here is I need to, when I'm adding the mask, I need to say new layer dot masks dot add property. That way I'm referring to my masks and I'm going to add a mask. Let's try it again. So now we're generating all the layers and they all have the same vertices here in the top left corner, but we can see that we are successfully applying these vertices. So now what we need to do is move these along basically to the next position so that we can go boom, 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 etc. So down below here, we basically, every time we finish one of these squares, we want to increment x to the next section. We want to say x, and then we want to say plus the width here, which is 300. We want to go to the next x here. So I'm going to grab my x value and plus equals. The first time through, it's going to start at 0. And the next time, it's going to say plus equals width. Now it's going to start at 300, then 600, 900, etc. But when do we tell the script to go to the next row? Basically, when we get to the last one here, which is when what is the value? Well, basically, when the max x is reached, which we discussed earlier, is the number that is the max number per row. When we reach that max x, we need to move to the next line. So we'll create an if statement to check this, and we'll say if I, which is tracking our width here, if I is equal to our max x minus 1, then what we want to do, we want to restart x because we want to go all the way back to the left. So x needs to equal 0, and for y, we need to increment it the same way we did for width, which is going to be plus equals height. But we don't want to do this to the width every time. Sometimes we're going to set the width to 0, so we'll just say else in this case, and that should complete it pretty good. Alright, so now let's go ahead and try it out. Make a new composition and run it. So now we are getting the squares we want. So not everything here is perfect. There's a couple more things we can do to spice it up. We can make sure that the anchor points are centered so that if we want to, say, rotate these or something, it's in the right position. And we can also make these bottom ones a little bit more aligned so that they're up here. You can refer to the code to check out how I did this to make sure that the last row is basically here. The last thing we really need to do is center these anchor points, which all are starting at the default location. So what we can do is just grab our layer, new layer in this case, and we're going to grab the property anchor point and set the value to something. We're also going to do the same thing with the position value. So I'll grab the property called position and set the value to something. Now it's actually pretty easy to calculate the center. So I'm going to grab my center variable here, and just above where I'm going to apply it, I'll set it equal to something. For the x center value, I'm just going to grab where my current x is, and I'm going to add half of the width of my square. So basically, if I start here at 0, how do I get to the center point? Well, I need to add half the width and half the height to get to the center. So basically, I'm going to take my x and y, and to each of them, I'm going to add half of their respective axis. So for x, I'm going to add the width, and I'm going to make sure it's half, so times 0.5. And then same for the height, y plus the height times 0.5. And this will just give us the center point we need. So now if we go ahead and create another comp, run it, now check it out up here, you can see the anchor points are now centered where they need to be. There's one last little tiny thing which you may not have noticed, which we can do. That is to turn off our original layer, because we still have this layer, and if we wanted to move these other ones around, we still have an image behind it. So if we turned it off, it looks a little nicer and we can see the effect more. So simply to do this at the very end of our for loop, after it's gone, we're going to grab, remember, our original layer, and we'll just say enabled equals false. And let's go ahead and do a last run here. Make a new composition, and this time let's use a little smaller, like 200 by 200. and click on Shatter. Alright, so now we've successfully shattered everything and everything is looking really good. I can also use this random scattering script that I have and basically move these around anywhere, and this will just really allow you to sort of make a collage effect, and there's a lot of possibilities once you shatter your images. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this week's video on Monday. Make sure you tune in Thursday for a quick tip tutorial. Be sure to hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe to be notified of new videos coming out, and we will see you guys next time.